You know, there are some writers who they do more than just tell stories. They act as a kind of conscience for society. They're the ones who go to the places we've forgotten or maybe chosen to forget, and they give a powerful, undeniable voice to the voiceless. Today, that's who we're talking about, a literary champion named Anilchandra Thakur. His entire life's work was about bearing witness to the silent struggles of rural India. It wasn't just about writing books. It was about fighting for people, one story at a time. So let's get into it. And right there, from the jump, you get it. This one line from his novel The Puppets, it just lays it all out. It's this haunting idea that runs through so much of his work. What if our lives aren't really our own? What if we're all just puppets, dancing to the tune of invisible strings, pulled by forces we can't even see? For Thakur, this wasn't just some philosophical game. For millions of people, this was reality. It's about a deep systemic powerlessness, that feeling of being a side character in your own life. And that's the core struggle he revisits, again and again.
To really get Thakur, you've got to understand the world that shaped him. We're talking about rural India, his home state of Bihar, in the years after independence. Look, for so many people in the villages, the whole promise of freedom, it felt like something happening a million miles away. The day-to-day reality was just a grim, unending cycle of hardship. The British were gone, sure, but the old systems of exploitation, they were still there, now run by local landlords and moneylenders, people Thakur once called the true leeches of society. This was a world where one bad monsoon could mean you starve, and a wedding could plunge your family into debt for generations.
And this phrase just nails it. It perfectly captures that deep disappointment that Thakur saw everywhere. The old colonial rulers were out, but a new kind of master, just as ruthless, had moved in. And we're not just talking about being poor. We're talking about a system, a maze designed so you could never escape. It was crushing debt passed from father to son, rigid caste rules that decided your worth the second you were born, and a justice system that, well, it usually just sided with whoever had the most power. This was the fertile ground from which his mission as a writer grew. He had to expose these invisible masters and the strings they were pulling.
So, who was this guy who took on such a huge mission? Anilchandra Thakur wasn't some outsider looking in, an academic studying from a distance. Nope, he was a product of the very world he wrote about. He grew up with an intimate first-hand knowledge of these struggles. He knew the smell of the earth after the first rain, and he knew the gnawing pain of an empty belly. For him, writing wasn't some intellectual game. It was an act of pure empathy. It was his promise to give a name, a face, and a story to people who had been silenced for generations, and to turn all that suffering into art that could not be ignored.
And here's what's so fascinating about him. This dual life he led. By day, he was an officer at the cozy regional rural bank. And that wasn't just a 9-to-5 job. It was his listening post. He sat at a desk where these big, abstract economic forces became painfully real. He saw the loan applications. He saw the thumbprints of illiterate farmers on papers they had no hope of reading. He saw the desperation in their eyes. He saw the nuts and bolts of the debt machine that trapped entire families. And then, at night, he would go home and transform that raw daily reality into literature. That combination, the practical banker and the passionate writer, is what gives his work such incredible authenticity.
And you can see from this timeline, it was a lifelong commitment. Born in '54 in a small village, he was surrounded by the world he'd write about. His master's degree in Hindi Lit gave him the formal tools for sure, but his real passion went way beyond the classroom. In 1993, he started editing a magazine called Suba, which means morning. And get this, it wasn't printed. It was a handwritten magazine. Can you just imagine that level of dedication? Painstakingly writing out every single page by hand, making copies just to create a platform for other local writers who had no other way to be heard. His entire life, right up until he passed away in 2007 after a long fight with brain cancer, was just this continuous act of service to literature and his community. All right, so let's talk about his weapons, his literary arsenal. Thakur was incredibly talented, a rare writer who was fluent and powerful in 4 different languages: Hindi, Maithili, English, and Angika. And this wasn't just to show off, it was strategic. Each language was a different tool for a different job. With Hindi, he could talk to the whole nation. With English, he could talk to the world. And with Maithili and Angika, he could speak directly to the heart of his own people, in the language they spoke at home. His body of work isn't just a bookshelf of novels. It's a full-on, multi-front attack on silence and injustice. Here we've got 2 great examples of his work. On one side, his English novel, The Puppets, which is his most direct take on control and manipulation, and on the other, his Hindi novel, Ek Ghar Sadak Par, which means a house on the street. It's this deeply moving story about the isolation of an old man just trying to hold on to his dignity in a busy, uncaring world. He also wrote other amazing Hindi novels like Ab Mani Jao, Now Please Agree, and the very thoughtful Angika Ha Sukapave, which asks, where else can one find peace? Just the titles alone show you his incredible range, from huge social critiques to the most intimate human dramas. Let's dig a little deeper into The Puppets, because it's such a brilliant allegory. The puppeteers, they aren't just one bad guy. It's a whole system working together. The moneylenders with their inescapable debt traps, the corrupt officials who look the other way, and the rigid social rules that lock people in place. And the strings they pull? Well, those are the tools of control. The chains of debt, the darkness of illiteracy, the prison of the caste system, and the heavy weight of tradition. But here's the thing. Thakur never just leaves you with despair. He always offers a way out. And in this book, the weapon, the one thing sharp enough to cut those strings, is education. The hero is a retired teacher who argues that learning to read isn't just a skill. It's the first real act of rebellion. It's liberation.
Okay, so let's go from that huge systemic struggle to something incredibly personal. This famous story of his Har Ghar Papa, which means the father who lost, is thought to be pretty autobiographical. It's about a conflict that I think so many of us, especially creative people, can understand. The main character, a poet called Kaviji, feels like his entire soul is tied to the peace and creativity he finds in his village. But the city represents the real world. It's all the societal pressure, the push to give up his art to secure his kid's future, to make them an engineer or a big-shot government officer, the gold standards of success in India. It's this absolutely heart-wrenching tug-of-war between your passion and your duty to your family.
And this is the ending that just breaks you. After all the pressure from his wife, his family, his own father, Kaviji finally gives in. He agrees to move to the city, to sacrifice his poetry for a more practical life. And as his kids, who are too young to really get what's happening, start cheering, "Papa, you lost! You lost the argument!" he replies with this soul-crushing line, "Yes, son, I truly lost." Wow. It's not about losing an argument about where to live. It's about the death of a dream. It's about losing a part of your own soul for what society tells you is success. It's a moment of tragedy that just hits so hard for anyone who's ever had to make that kind of choice.
Now, beyond Hindi and English, Thakur did something pretty monumental for a language that many people might not have even heard of, Angika. It's a language spoken by about 15 million people in parts of Bihar and Jharkhand. And for a long, long time, it was kind of dismissed as just a dialect, not a real literary language. But then, in 1975, when he was only 21 years old, Thakur wrote an epic poem called Kach. And that poem is now considered the first major literary work ever written in Angika. I mean, what a massive achievement.
Right. To put it simply, his impact here was foundational. He wasn't just another writer using the Angika language, he was practically building its literary reputation from scratch. With Kach, which retells a story from the Mahabharata, he basically proved that Angika was a language capable of expressing huge, epic, profound ideas just like any other major language. This act of championing a local dialect, of giving it a stage and a powerful voice, it's just so central to his legacy as a voice for the voiceless. Okay, so we've talked about the man and his incredible work. But what happens when the writer's gone? A legacy can be a really fragile thing, It can easily get lost to time. But the story of what happened with Anilchandra Thakur's work, it's actually this incredibly hopeful example of how a family's love, combined with modern technology, can make sure a powerful voice keeps echoing into the future, reaching whole new generations in brand new ways. Just look at how his work has been kept alive. First, you have the original print books, the foundation. Then, his family made sure his work went digital, putting it on platforms like Kindle so anyone, anywhere in the world could read it. After that, something really special happened. His wife, Poonam Thakur, started recording audiobooks of his stories. I mean, can you imagine a more personal connection, hearing his words in her voice? And finally, it's been brought straight into the 21st century with the Anilchandra Thakur GPT, an AI that's been trained on everything he ever wrote, giving us a completely new, interactive way to explore his world.
So what this all means is that his legacy isn't just sitting on a shelf in some dusty archive. It's alive. It's being revitalized. It exists now in all these different dimensions. The physical text on the page, the intimate sound of his wife's voice telling his stories, and even in the analytical, interactive world of AI.
It's this incredible effort, led by his family, to make sure that the voice of Anilchandra Thakur doesn't fade away, but keeps speaking to us about the human spirit.
And that kind of leaves us with a pretty powerful question, doesn't it? What's been done to preserve Thakur's work is so inspiring. It's a blueprint. It shows us that technology, from a simple Kindle file to a complex AI, can be an amazing tool for preserving culture, a lifeboat for stories that might otherwise just disappear. So it makes you wonder, whose stories are we still not hearing? If we can do all this to bring one writer's world to a global audience, who else is out there? Which other forgotten voices from which other overlooked corners of the world should we be listening to? The puppets are still there, and they still need a voice.